Fire in Hemlock by Diana Wynne Jones. Part 1. New Hero. Allegro vivace. A dead sleep came over me, and from my horse I fell. Tam Lin. Polly sighed and laid her book face down on her bed. She rather thought she had read it after all some time ago. Before she swung her feet across to get on with her packing, she looked up at the picture above the bed. She sighed again. There had been a time, some years back, when she had gazed at that picture and thought it marvelous. Dark figures had seemed to materialize out of its dark center. Strong, running dark figures, always at least 4 of them, racing to beat out the flames in the foreground. There had been times when you could see the figures quite clearly. Other times they had been shrouded in the rising smoke. There had even been a horse in it sometimes. Not now. Here, now. She could see it was simply a large color photograph, 3 feet by 2 feet, taken at dusk, of some hay bales burning in a field. The fire must have been spreading, since there was smoke in the air, and more smoke enveloping the high hemlock plant in the front. But there were no people in it. The shapes she used to take for people were only too clearly dark clumps of the dark hedge behind the blaze. The only person in that field must have been the photographer. Polly had to admit that he had been both clever and lucky. It was a haunting picture. It was called Fire in Hemlock. She sighed again as she swung her feet to the floor. The penalty of being grown up was that you saw things like this photograph as they really were. And Granny would be in any minute to point out that Mr. Perks and Fiona were not going to wait while she did her packing tomorrow morning, and Granny would have things to say about feet on the bedspread. Polly just wished she felt happier at the thought of another year of college. Her hand knocked the book. Polly did not get up after all, and books put down on their faces, spoiling them, Granny would say. It's only a paperback, Granny. It was called Times Out of Mind, editor L. Perry, and it was a collection of supernatural stories. Polly had been attracted to it a couple of years back, largely because the picture on the cover was not unlike the Fire in Hemlock photograph. Dusky smoke with a dark blue umbrella-like plant against the smoke. And now Polly remembered. She had read the stories through then, and none of them were much good. Yet here was an odd thing. She could have sworn the book had been called something different when she first bought it, and surely hadn't one of the stories actually been called Fire in Hemlock too? Polly picked up the book with her finger in it to keep the place in the story she was reading. Two-Timer, it was called, and it was about someone who went back in time to his own childhood and changed things so that his life ran differently the second time. She remembered the ending now. The man finished by having 2 sets of memories, and the story wasn't worked out at all well. Polly did not worry when she lost her place in it, as she leafed through looking for the one she thought had been called Fire in Hemlock. Odd. It wasn't there. Had she dreamed it then? She often did dream the most likely seeming things. Odder still, half the stories she thought she remembered reading in this book were not there. And yet she did very clearly remember reading all the stories which seemed to be in the book now. For a moment she felt like the man in Two-Timer, with his double set of memories. What a madly detailed dream she must have had. Polly found her place in the story again, largely because the pages were spread apart there, and stopped in the act of putting the book face down on her rumpled bedspread. Was it Granny who minded you putting books down like this? Granny didn't read much anyway. And why should I feel so worried about it? Polly asked aloud. And where's my other photo, the one I stole? A frantic sense of loss came upon her, so strong that for a moment she could have cried. Why should she suddenly have memories that did not seem to correspond with the facts? Suppose they were once facts, Polly said to herself, with her hand still resting on the book. Ever since she was a small girl, she had liked supposing things, and the habit died hard, even at the age of 19. Suppose, she said, I really am like the man in the story and something happened to change my past. It was intended simply as a soothing daydream to bury the strange, pointless worry that seemed to be growing in her. But suddenly, out of it leaped a white flash of conviction. It was just like the way those 4 or more figures used to leap into being behind the fire in that photograph. Polly glanced up at it, almost expecting to see them again. There were only men-shaped clumps of hedge. The flash of conviction had gone too, but it left Polly with a dreary, nagging suspicion in its place, that something had been different in the past, and if it had, it was because of something dreadful she had done herself. But there seemed no way to discover what was different. Polly's past seemed a smooth string of normal, half-forgotten things. School and home, happiness and miseries, fun and friends, and for some reason, a memory of eating toasted buns for tea, dripping butter. Apart from this odd memory about the book, there seemed no foothold for anything unusual. If nothing happened, then there's nothing to remember, she told herself, trying to sound philosophical. Of course there's nowhere to start. For some reason, that appalled her. She crouched, with her hand growing damp on the book, forgetting her grimy shoes tangling in the bedspread and the suitcases open on the floor, staring into her appallingly normal memories. A Cotswold town, London, a shopping precinct somewhere, a horse. That's absurd. I don't know any horses, she said. It's no good. I'll have to go back to the time before it all started, or didn't start, and get in from that end. That was when she was how old? 10? What was she doing then? What friends had she? Friends, that did it. From 9 years ago came swimming the shape of Polly's once dear friend Nina. Fat, silly Nina. Granny used to call Nina a ripe banana, and Polly was so attached to Nina that Granny had agreed to have Nina along with Polly that first time Polly came to stay with Granny. That would be back around the time there was first a question of divorce between Polly's parents. Back, too, to when Polly's favorite reading was a fat book called Heroes that had once been Granny's. At that, Polly raised her head. The funeral, she said.